Welcome to the Friday Night Drive podcast, the West and South edition. I'm Daily Chronicle sports editor Eddie Carifio. I'm alongside Shaw Sports regional editor J.T. Pedelty. J.T., my man, what is up?
Not much, man. We just kind of talked in the pregame here, pregame huddle. We're both just a little bit under the weather, so forgive any little scratchiness in the voice or nasally talk you guys hear. But it's football season. You got to tough through, right?
Exactly. I'm giving 110% today. I don't care if my body's only at 60%. You gotta, toughen up and get it done. We shouldn't even have talked about it this much. These kids, I'll guarantee you, the players in what are we now? 7 weeks into the season are hurting much more than either one of us are right now.
They're kids. They don't know what hurting is yet.
Even if we've got about 40 years on them, 50 years on them, I don't know.
No, we actually just had for my daughter's soccer team, there's a Street of Youth soccer tradition at the parents scrimmage against the kids towards the end of the season. That was yesterday. So yeah, my legs I feel like a football player in about week 7 right now. My legs
I feel like we talked about this last year too on the podcast.
It is quite possible.
You don't let up on them. I hope you destroy them by at least 15.
Well, I'm the head coach, so I'm trying to build their confidence at the same time but one of the other parents, yeah, he had like a hat trick plus one. He took no mercy on those kids. So
okay.
Good for him. Good for him.
Anyway, we got a lot of stuff to talk about this week. You want to start out west? I feel like we should be starting out west. We don't have a guest this week. Sam Ramirez will be more than likely joining us next week. But we can handle some west talk, I think.
I think so. Where do you want to start, Eddie? I'm ready.
I don't know. Dealer's choice. You seemed anxious on it. I want to get into BNC later, but I figure we can start out west now. I know that was something that you very much wanted to.
That sounds good. Yeah, I got a few good ones. The first one that jumped out with me, we got a 6-0 non-conference matchup. Another one of those long trips. Dixon 6-0 at Johnston City 6-0. Dixon's number 2 in Class 4A. Johnston City's number 5 in Class 2A. My fellow SIU Salukis, go Salukis, probably recognize the name of Johnston City. Most people in Illinois probably don't, but it's kind of the last town before the Marion-Carbondale exit on Interstate 57. So it's a long drive from Dixon. It's a long drive. But that replaces Rockford Christian on Dixon's schedule. This should be a fun matchup, I think, Eddie. I mean, I think Dixon's the bigger school and ranked a little higher in their class. So, I mean, you have to like the Duke's chances, but it's also probably a 5 or 6 hour bus trip, so, probably stopping in Effingham, home of the Flaming Hearts for a nice pregame meal and then getting down there. Johnson City's crushed every team they've played other than week 3 thing against El Dorado, which I have verified that is how it is pronounced. But since a week 3 close game with them, 14-0, Johnson City's pretty much demolished everyone. And Dixon's coming off a game where they scored a school record 71 points. That's a 99-year-old record they broke, beating Winnebago 71-7. So I think this should be a nice little out of nowhere preseason test that you didn't expect to have for these two teams where they kind of get to test themselves against, something unfamiliar, which in the playoffs, that's a lot of what you're dealing with once you get past those first couple rounds is schools that you might have to look them up on a map to find out where they are. And you don't know much about them other than a little huddle video. So this would be kind of almost like a little playoff test for both teams, I think.
Yeah, and you say Johnson City's been crushing everybody. I should point out Dixon's been crushing everybody. They don't have that one hiccup yet. I mean, obviously the Byron game you assume will be close either way, but for now that they've been crushing anyone, including putting a 35-0 against an Oregon team that Oregon hasn't given up more than 20 points to anybody that's not Dixon and Byron. So yes. Dixon is absolutely steamrolling everybody as well. If we've learned anything over the last 2 weeks, probably don't listen to me when you go out of your bookie, but definitely I feel, obviously not being an expert in Johnson City, I still feel Dixon's probably, the favorite in this one.
Yeah, I would think so, just based on school size and everything else. But, when you're talking about and this is off the top of my head, I apologize if I'm wrong, about a 300-mile drive, I'd say probably.
It better be 300 miles. If it's,
I would say about 300, just guessing off the top of my head. I've actually made that drive before for some reason from Dixon to Carbondale. So I drove right by Johnston City, but I think this would be just a good matchup. You have to like Dixon's chances, but I think, like I said, you have two teams that know nothing about each other. All you got is video. I mean, really don't even know each other based on reputation, I would wager, unless there's an alumni of one of the schools that's at the other,
Yeah.
and that's how they line this up or something. So this is what playoff football looks like once you get past that second round, and all of a sudden you're not playing the town next door or someone in your conference or someone you'd play now. It's hey, here's the school, you know nothing about them, any of their players, you don't know where the town is. Go there, play a football game, see how it turns out for you. So it'd be a good challenge for both, I think, and a nice chance for Dixon to kind of, cut their teeth, get that seventh win, get themselves a great chance at a home playoff game, and just kind of get ready for the postseason and kind of how that week looks different than a normal week.
We'll flop back to the BNC a little later, but we could stay out west for the time being. I don't know, another one that looks interesting out that way is Sterling and Quincy. Both teams undefeated in the Western Big Six. Sterling 4-2 overall, Quincy 6-0 overall. What do you know about that one, bud?
Yeah, Sterling beat Geneseo last week. That's been a rivalry, forever, going back since what I think they've been in the same conference, or they were always in the same conference since the 40s, 50s, with the NCIC. So that one was always a slugfest for a championship or something. Sterling won 13-6. I don't think this one will be a slugfest. Quincy does not do slugfests. Quincy throws the ball around. Brady Little, their quarterback, is thrown for 2,168 yards this year and 28 touchdowns. He's now, I think, in the top 5 in IHSA history, unless, someone else has thrown 30 this year and passed him and whatever. But I think he's in the top 5 in IHSA history for touchdown passes. So I would expect probably not a low scoring game, although Sterling would probably like to, rein them in as much as they can, but expect a good game against, the number 2 team in Class 7A.
Yeah, I mean, if Sterling can, limit Quincy a little bit, that bodes really well for them. It's just going to be a question of how, as good as their defense has been this year, what they're going to be able. Quincy's been obviously so much on offense. I'm not even going to say anything on this one. I'm so gun shy after the last 2 weeks. I'm just obviously I will get to it a little later, but that Rochelle Morris game, that's just
Yep, it was that
killed my confidence.
Yep, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But one interesting thing I saw on Quincy, Don O'Brien on Twitter, who's a great follow if you're interested in Quincy athletics in that area. He pointed out that this Quincy team, this group of seniors, since they've been in high school, the Quincy varsity based football team has won more games than their program did in the 1980s or the 1990s or the aughts, the early 2000s, however you want to call them. But yeah, they've won 29 games in the last 4 years. Yeah, 29 games and counting the last 4 years. They didn't win that many in any of those 3 decades. So, that's talk about a program that's really, kind of established itself and turned things around. That's pretty outstanding. But yeah, I mean, I think this should be a great game. I think Sterling's got the work cut out for him. But one thing we do know, if it turns into a shootout, I mean, from all the years of seeing Sterling teams as they played in conferences with the teams down in my area, the Ottawas, the Streeters, the LaSalle Perus. One thing about Sterling is, they have no shortage of athletes in that area and at that high school. So you can have a wide open game. They've got the people to keep up with you, I think.
Yeah, they haven't put up a ton of points this year. So obviously they're going to want to keep it low scoring. A shootout probably doesn't bode particularly well for them. But if that defense does what they've been able to do most of the year, it could be an interesting one. I know there's one more interesting one out west, and that's another undefeated team versus a one-loss team in the. There's no fun nickname for the NUIC, But we got Eastland Pearl City and Winslow. But yeah, Newark's not fun. That literally hurts my sinuses to say. I can't believe your head didn't explode.
Yeah, Eastland Pearl City's 5-1, 4-1 in the Newark, and Lena Winslow 6-0, 5-0. I'm not going to say it anymore either. It is awful.
Yeah, please don't.
Yeah, Eastland Pearl City was all over Westmont last week, 54-8, which unfortunately for Westmont, kind of short on numbers. I saw them earlier this year, and man, they play their hearts out, but just kind of, you don't have enough horses or the horses to kind of compete on a week-to-week basis. But yeah, they beat Westmont 54-8. Eastland Pearl City's only loss is to Dupec back in week 2, so they're on a bit of a roll here. And Lena Winslow is the number 2 team in Class 1A. They were last year's state runners up. This looks like probably Lena Winslow's last potential stumbling block. Other two undefeated seed. They do have 4-2 Galena next week, but this is probably their biggest challenge left until the postseason. So I think this should be a pretty good game. You hope Eastland Pearl City can hang in there and give Lena Winslow a good challenge and put themselves in position to maybe do something at the end of the game.
Yeah, I still feel like they're probably the dogs in this one, though. And again, wrong about everything. But I just what Lewin's been able to do and everything. Like you said, potential stumbling block, but if they do what they've done, I think this one's theirs, right?
Yeah, I mean, and you're home. You're playing for undefeated regular season. I said Galena's a good team too, so they'll have to come back out and get one next week, and then obviously week 9. But yeah, I would think you have to like Lena Winslow's chances, but definitely not one to definitely don't look past EPC because they've proven they're a good team too, and they're on a 4-game winning streak here. So anytime you got a team with a little momentum, as we saw with all the upsets we've been talking about here the past few weeks, almost all of those were a team that was undefeated and another, or with one loss, and a team coming in that had just won 3 or 4 in a row and kind of had that momentum built, and we talked about it with Princeton a couple weeks ago, with Morris last week. Sometimes teams just kind of run into a team that has a better day than you and maybe has a little more momentum, maybe has a little more of a kick in the butt to, man, we can prove something by winning this game, that the team who's favored, not that there's point spreads in high school football. We're at least like a year away from that.
Yeah, if that.
Yeah, before. But yeah, this is I think this will be a pretty good one. But yeah, you got to like Lena Winslow.
And I think technically add the list of the 1-loss teams upsetting the 0-loss teams. The Kalen Morris was technically, it was an undefeated Kalen team at a time and a 1-loss Morris team, although probably not as drastic as it's even debatable if you would call that an upset in the first place, despite my ramblings 2 weeks ago. But because I was talking it from the standpoint of Kalen pulling off an upset, but still technically that was a undefeated team and a 1-loss team. Yeah. So with the 1-loss team coming out on top, so like you said, there's been a chain of those, and there's a bunch of them this week. So there probably will be one of them this week, right? So I was going to say there probably would be like one of these 1-loss teams playing an undefeated team, whether it's a Eastland Pearl City or maybe like a 2-loss team like Sterling against an undefeated team that we've talked about so far. That there's, to follow that trend that you were pointing out that we've seen the last couple of weeks, that definitely seems to happen. One we could be looking at, want to just shift and run right into your way, because Coal City and Wilmington, that could be one of those. Yes.
Let's jet east with the rising sun. Yes. Coal City 5-1, Wilmington 6-0. This is one of those games like Sycamore Morris that just kind of from the beginning of the year we've talked about almost every week on the podcast as what's coming up. And here it is, week 7, Coal City at Wilmington. This is the one I'll be at Friday. I'm really excited for it. Coal City's won 5 straight since a seasoning opening loss to Morris, and they've outscored their opponents 260-25 since then. Peatone's really the only team that's played them relatively close other than Morris. Wilmington's won 19 in a row, going back to season opening loss last year to Seneca, and that's a loss Wilmington avenged with an overtime playoff win in the Class 2A bracket quarterfinals, I think. And Wilmington's outscored its opponents 272-61 this year. Both teams have scored exactly 272 points. There's only a 5-point difference in their points allowed. Their schedules are pretty comparable on who they've played, although they have some, obviously in the conference, who you have the last 2 weeks and who they had the first 2 and blah, blah, blah. But this has all the makings of a good one. You have a defending state and conference champ, and it's at their field. You have to say they're probably, you got to say the smart money would say Wilmington's the favorite, but Coal City's awfully good. This just should be a great game, Eddie.
Yeah, no, you hit all the nails on the head. We've been framing a lot of stuff. Maybe it's my stuffy head, but we've been framing a lot of stuff in terms of upsets. Who's the FND pick in this one? Who's the official pick in this one? Is it Wilmington?
The Seuss went with the Wildcats. Yes, Wilmington.
So that's it. I think that again, this one seems wide open. Those 2 teams are just about as even gets.
Yeah,
You
Coal
know,
City has an awful lot back. Wilmington probably had more holes to fill in from last year, but when you have programs like that, it's you plug them in, you keep playing. So I think I'm looking forward to a really good football game. Haven't got a chance to get over to Wilmington in a few years, so I'm looking forward to a really good football game, and you know, hopefully it comes down to the wire, and whoever wins this one really earns, first up the Illinois Central 8 Conference Championship. Although Mantino still has something to say about it, they don't have a loss yet. But hopefully whoever gets this earns that. And either way, I think both these teams are teams that nobody wants to see in the postseason, early in the early rounds.
we'll sit on there for a couple more minutes. I know there's a couple interesting games that you wanted to touch on, including the private school. Although, is Aurora Central Catholic in the Chicagoland officially, or are they the ones that are just playing all the Chicagoland?
I mean, they're more in the Chicagoland Prairie than Walther Christian is, who I actually did it in our football notebook that you can always see it from all over our coverage area in the Monday and Tuesday on FridayNightDrive.com, from Sauk Valley and Crystal Lake and everywhere, Joliet area. But yeah, we have, I actually pointed out with a note in there that after this week, Aurora Central Catholic will have played 4 games against Chicagoland Prairie schools, and Walther Christian, a member of the conference, will only have played 2. So, they scheduled everyone but St. Bede in the conference. But yeah, Marquette's 4-2, Aurora Central Catholic's 3-3. Marquette is coming off kind of a bye week of sorts, that forfeit against Walther Christian that we talked about. Seneca is getting a bye week. Forfeit from Walther Christian this week. They were looking for opponents, but none of them have come through, at least as of yet. I know a couple years ago, I think it was on a late Wednesday, Seneca found a game with Clinton, which is a weird pairing, but you never know. Maybe something comes up, but not looking good. But kind of more to the point here. I thought it might be interesting to talk about, Marquette chance to qualify for the playoffs, probably clinch a playoff bid. They have a decent amount of playoff points. Going against a Aurora Central Catholic team, but Marquette coming off that bye week, Eddie, coming off, I assume you've talked to some coaches over the years. I know I have about, what do you do with this week when it comes up? It used to never happen, ever. I never remember this happening. Now, every year you have a few teams in your area, a few teams in my area end up with this surprise week off that it's like, oh, geez, what do we do? Have you over the years had a chance to talk to coaches? Just kind of, what do you think they do with that extra week?
I'm trying to think. Usually, GK had to deal with it week 1 on pretty short notice, finding an opponent. And actually did manage to find one with the Rockford Christian deal that the BNC has been going through this year. So, it's our teams have had luck scrambling to find the games. I mean, that bye week, I assume you just take it as a practice. You get the extra practice in. My point would be teams should probably start getting used to it if this playoff proposal goes through, because quite a few teams in the first round of the playoffs will be getting buys anyway and have 2 weeks off.
Yeah, that's a great observation. Yeah,
something that's – go ahead.
I know some coaches I've talked to over the years when these have happened have talked about, well, this is a self-scouting week. This is a week 2. We're going to scout ourselves the way we would have scouted our week 7 opponent. And here's our strengths, here's our weaknesses, and then we kind of know what to work on, going to that. Some teams I'm sure are perfectly happy resting up. Although, every team I'm ever come across, every AD, every head coach, they'd rather be playing. They look for opponents. They're willing to travel far. They're willing to play bigger schools. They're willing to do whatever they have to, because high school football season, it's a short season. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it for especially for us, but it's a short season. 9 weeks. Even if you make the state championship game, you're still talking about from the start of practice to the end of the season, 4 months. So, it's not a long season, and you don't want to take any opportunities to get out on that field and play away from the kids. So
yeah, you only have 9 guaranteed games, and someone forfeits, can't play. That's 11% of your games gone.
Yeah.
So it's that's why teams are so diligent in trying to find, or tenacious in trying to find a opponent to fill in, like what do you say, Seneca probably was this week, although like you said, that's a tough ask this point in the year.
It can be tough when you're, the way when they added Clinton a couple years ago. Clinton, a little bit of a bigger school, kind of made a fit because Seneca at that point hadn't established themselves. They were kind of on the rise. Everyone could see it coming, but they weren't what have they won? 26, 27 in a row regular season games. we mentioned earlier, their playoff loss last year was to the state champion and it took overtime. So, that's a tough team when you have a Seneca, come knocking at your door. Hey, I see you have the off week. You want to get drilled by us? That's a tough ask. But you know what? I know the AD and head coach at Seneca very well. And, both of them, I guarantee, they'd be willing to, play up if they had to get a game. Just to this point hasn't worked out. One other that's kind of down in my neck of the woods, Eddie, and
I just want to point out before
Yes.
we move on too much from that, because you point out, yeah, like Seneca, it's hard for them to find a game, especially because at this point it is forfeits you're looking at. So a team that's about Seneca's size, they're giving up a win potentially, from the forfeit to, play a team, like you said, it's won 26 out of 27 games. So, I mean, that's, yeah, you want to play, but also, if you're on the fringe of a playoff berth, you probably want that win and take the extra game in the form of a playoff game.
Yeah, that's true. And you know what? We should give out mad props to Dwight Gardner, South Wilmington. Dwight a couple weeks ago had that Walter Christian forfeit. That, as far as I know, Walter Christian hasn't canceled their season. If they have, I haven't seen an announcement or anything. So I think they're kind of going week to week. But Seneca knew at the end of their game last week that they were probably not going to get a game with Walter Christian. But all credit in the world to Dwight. A couple, was it week 5? They had that Walter Christian forfeit. They wanted their kids to get on the field. They're fighting for a playoff spot. They're 3-3 right now. They scheduled Maroa Forsyth. They scheduled a powerhouse and they took one on the chin, 57-16. But props to them for getting their kids out there, getting the game. It only is going to make them better. Dwight's sitting there at 3-3 right now because they had Seneca the next week. So how you like that? Week to week to week, Marquette, Maroa Forsyth, Seneca, and that's their 3 losses. But coming up, they have St. Bede, who's 1-5. They have Alton Marquette, that's 0-6, and then a rematch with Marquette team that they barely lost to. Then they have that in week 9. Weird thing where both those meetings with Marquette are at Marquette in Ottawa.
Huh.
Yeah, it's just going to be I think just because we mentioned it, credit goes to Dwight.
No, absolutely.
Stanford and his staff for picking up not just an opponent, but a powerhouse opponent. And, making your football team a little better, getting out there, even though it costs you a win and maybe a home playoff game if they do get in.
Yeah, I sure hope for their sake they get the 5 wins. It sounds like it's set up for them to get there. I sure hope they do. Okay, now you can move on to Bureau Valley and Illini West. I'm psychic. I assume that's where you're going.
It is. Both teams come in 3-3. I did have a correction on this. I know we like to talk about Illinois towns with strange pronunciations. I just found out I was at a Halloween trick-or-treat thing with someone who's from the Bureau Valley area. It's Manless, not Manlius. So a correction from like 3 weeks ago. Manless. The I is just there. There's no I in Manless. Well, there is, but you don't pronounce it. Anyway, Bureau Valley, Illini West.
So there are no men. It's Manless.
Yes, Manless in Manless. Bureau Valley, Illini West, both 3-3. Bureau Valley, I just thought it was an interesting team to mention. They moved to the Lincoln Trail Prairie Land this season from the Three Rivers. And it's been a good move for them so far. They lost a close one, 27-21 to Elmwood Brimfield, but they're still 3-3. They're right on the verge of it. They have an excellent chance at making the postseason for the first time in 8 years. And this is Bureau Valley's, a one-time powerhouse program not that long ago. 2005, they were the 3A state runners up. 2006, I'm sorry, 05 or 06, they won the state championship. I'm not sure which year. I typed my notes and I put 05 for both of them, but they were the runners up. Then they got it done the next year in the mid-aughts, to say that again. But they have a tough one at Macomb in week 8, but they finish up with 1-5 West Hancock. So if Bureau Valley can get this one, they'll really put themselves in good shape to return to the postseason.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to see if they, this is one of those. Week 7's got a lot of pivotal games. We'll get to that in a second when we talk about the Big Northern Conference. When you're 3-3, big difference between 4-3 and 3-4 going into the last 2 games of the year. And that's every 3-3 team's in that situation, obviously. And when you're not playing a 6-0 or an 0-6 team or whatever, there's a lot that can happen. So this is, like you said, definitely a big one.
And for anyone who enjoys knowing how seeing how the sausage is made, so to speak, we've had a lot of internal conversations, all of our sports editors and our writers, about, how do we approach talking about the playoffs now? Because, used to be 5 wins and you'd be sitting there wringing your hands on selection Saturday, hoping you get in, now it's not a for sure thing, but it looks like 5 wins and you're going to be pretty good unless maybe you have a very few amount of playoff points, which is the combined wins of your opponents that season. And 4 and 5 teams increasingly seem to be getting into the playoffs every year as there have been fewer teams playing 11-man football. So, we've had a lot of conversation about that. Bureau Valley is one of those teams. Could they get in at 4 and 5? Sure, they might be able to, but they have only gotten 2 wins from the 2 non-conference opponents they played outside of the Lincoln Trail Prairie Land, the Monmouth United and Ridgeview Lexington, 2. So they're not going to have a ton of playoff points. Those non-conference games are where you really can pick up playoff points. So, they're that type of team that, you definitely, almost definitely going to need 5 wins. So this is a really big one for the Storm.
Yeah. So 3-3, like we said, is a huge situation. Key situation of games that I'm going to move on to the Big Northern. I've wanted to talk about them for a couple of weeks, and it's a really interesting conference to me. Obviously, I cover GK that plays in there. You look at it, right now there's 4 3-3 teams sitting in there, and 2 of them play this week in Stillman Valley and GK. So obviously that one's a big one this week. The winner is in pretty good shape to make the postseason. They'll have they each have one team that struggled this year left on their schedule and one pretty good team left on their schedule. So that win becomes super important. The wild card is exactly how good Rockford Lutheran is. Because Rockford Lutheran has 2 losses, obviously the same 2 losses everyone in the conference is going to have with Byron and Dixon. And then, except Byron and Dixon only, it's the only one that hasn't lost to both of them. But, Rockford Lutheran has those 2 losses, but they haven't played, of these 4 3-3 teams, they only played 1. They played Stillman and rolled pretty big over them. But they haven't played the other 3, which is Oregon and North Boone and GK. So, it could be 5 teams in the middle, actually, that we're talking about here, and that Rockford Lutheran, Oregon might get them, North Boone could get them, GK could get them. So those are their last 3 games. So that conference is just set up for a huge ride down the stretch here, and it kicks off with Stillman Valley at GK on Friday. So how this thing all shakes out is just really interesting.
Yeah, Rockford Lutheran's one of those teams you see that pop up in high school football sometimes, where it's like they haven't played a close game this year. I mean, every game's been decided by 20 points or more, I believe, other than the forfeit to Rockford Christian, which IHSA scores 1-0. I don't like that. It should be 2-0. You can't score 1 point in a football game, but that's
but that it was a forfeit though. That's what I mean. When you look at it, for sure it was a forfeit.
Boy, I would say I'm sure there has been a 2-0 game. Yeah, I'm sure there has been a 2-0 game. I haven't got to cover one yet. That would be fun and it would go fast, which I also enjoy. But but yeah, Rockford Lutheran is one of those teams where they beat teams by 30, 40 points. They lose to teams by 30, 40 points. I guess the one pointing out, if you're asking, is Rockford Lutheran pretty good? That win over Stillman Valley would lead you to think they're pretty good. They won that one 34-14 back in week 3. So like I said, that's the only one they've had. Other than that, they've played 2 6-0 teams and lost handily, and played 3 losing teams and won handily. So, that Big Northern Conference is, you just look at the standings. I think 7 of the 10 teams in the conference are at 500 or above right now. With all these 3-3 matchups, that's not going to last long, but it sure is fun to look at it and be like, oh, nice.
Well, I think they're all going to end 4 and 5 or above. You'll have the 3 at the bottom, and then I don't know if it's mathematically possible or not, but I think you're going to have everyone. It's potentially anyway could have at least 4 wins. So, and as we have pointed out, that potentially sets you up for a playoff spot. I know in these closed circuit with an asterisk for the BNC conferences, there's your playoff points are pretty stable, but. Like I said, that's a pretty big asterisk this year.
Yeah, close conferences are usually a math problem.
Yeah.
If you win, someone else loses. If you win, that's a playoff point you don't get. If you lose, that's a playoff point you do get. And it's all math. But the all the forfeits coming from Rockford Christian this year has just thrown a wild card into that picture where, instead of your normal standard number of playoff teams, you get a couple wins and those opponents that you replace Rockford Christian with, a couple extra wins, and you kind of throw them into the system, and all of a sudden you might creep another playoff team out of the Big Northern Conference this year.
Yeah, so that was just definitely a conference not to sleep on, especially coming down the stretch here. There's going to be big games every week. Obviously, pretty sure Byron Dixon is next week. So I think a perfect week to have Sam on. I hope he's available.
Yes, we will definitely want him on. There's one other game that kind of you alluded to before that I think we definitely need to talk about, but it's kind of revisiting last week, is what's going on in the Interstate 8. When Rochelle doesn't just beat Morris, but handles Morris, which is one I don't think I don't think Rochelle winning would have stunned anybody. But I think Rochelle, the way they handled it, I think they held Morris scoreless into the fourth quarter. It ended up 37-15. I think that's a surprising result, and kind of a, the Hubs are saying, hey, we're back. We're right here.
Yeah, I don't think we would have thought Morris would have won by 3 touchdowns in that one, let alone the team that, you're thinking is the underdog going in. So just an incredible performance by them all the way around. Dylan Manning had 219 yards rushing, had a pretty big game. They also had a couple guys with a couple picks. They did I think a pretty good job of turning the ball over against Morris, which leads us into this week. Rochelle has Caneland.
Oh, that'll be a good one.
Yeah, no, for Rochelle, Rochelle should be open for some chaos at the top of the I-8. The Sycamore Morris game next week. That's either Sycamore playing for the outright I-8 title, or there's a 3-way tie for first if Rochelle takes care of Caneland this week, which, I mean, Rochelle is at the top of that list. You talk about the cream of the crop in the I-8, you have to have Rochelle in that conversation. So,
and them coming back from when the conference was split with the Kishwaukee River, them coming back to playing all these teams regularly. Rochelle was on that other side, the small side, or whatever you would call it. And they've come back and rejoined the Sycamores, LPs, Morrises, Canelands, Ottawa, and rejoined them, and it's the same old Hubs. They're absolutely rolling. This game with Caneland should be a really good matchup. Rochelle 5-1, Caneland 4-2. This is Rochelle's chance to say, no doubt about it. They have Ottawa the next week, which, you'd have to think Rochelle has a pretty good chance of winning and finishing out the conference loop with that one loss to Sycamore. And then, for Caneland, this is their chance to say, hey, we aren't too bad either, against a Rochelle team that's riding high. We talked about earlier with some of these upsets, sometimes maybe that team that's the underdog that came in with one more loss or whatever, maybe they have a little extra, kick in the rear end to a little more motivation. I would think certainly Caneland, this is, all of a sudden, winning this game against Rochelle is a statement game. Maybe last week before that game at Morris, it wasn't. So this is another potential statement game for Caneland to make.
Yeah, obviously I was high on Caneland for a while, and they're still a really good team. There's obviously a ton of talent there, but you look at it, 85-17 the last 2 weeks in losses to Sycamore and Morris. Talking with Michael Forguson, the coach out there, he said the Sycamore game, and he's right about this, it was a little closer than the score indicated. It ended up being 35-7, but it was like a 14-7 game at halftime. They were in it. I think they were actually up 7-0, if I'm remembering it right. So, I mean, they did some things until Sycamore has not struggled in the run game, but hasn't been like, what you think of with the Sycamore team and running the ball this year. And they were that team. They turned into that team, got back to being that team on Friday night against Caneland. So it'll be interesting to see if they could keep that up going forward. I think they're down at la-salle this week before the Morris game next week, as they look to, as you say, close out the loop undefeated and keep all this chaos in a 3-team tie from happening. So, no, a lot of obviously where was I going with that? Oh, Morris is the last thing about Morris is obviously to make it all the more impressive, that 37-15 win, something I meant to say was Morris hadn't given up more than 17 points this year to anybody that's not Peoria. So what we're saying, basically what I'm trying to say is the Rochelle offense is almost as good as Peoria's.
Yeah, and I mean Peoria High. I mean, we're talking about a team that's put up 330 points this year, and just I mean, you just go down there, and that's with a game where they were held to 18 by Normal West. Other than that, I mean, you look at how much Peoria scored: 56, 46, 58, 86, and 66 last week in the win over Richwood. So I mean, that there's no they give up some, or they score some points. So that's definitely. Um,
Yes.
that's a thing for Rochelle to be in that company with putting up points on Morris. Not as many, but Morris hasn't. Morris doesn't give up a lot of points. That's kind of what they do, so just an impressive performance from Rochelle. All around.
Absolutely. Click to pick. You got one?
Well, you know what? We were talking Rochelle. I think that leads us nicely into yours, right?
It does. I should have just done mine. No, there's a name I mentioned, and that's Dylan Manning. I mean, obviously, Rochelle keeps things on the ground. Like I said, Caneland, not that they did bad against Sycamore. I think it was 170 something yards on 34 carries Sycamore had, but that sort of grounding it on the ground, is even more so for Rochelle. Rochelle does that even more than Sycamore does, because obviously Sycamore has some potential in the passing game, has had some success in the passing game with Burt Goucher quarterback and Carter York and Aiden Weiser and all these other receivers they have. But Rochelle, they just grind it out. So I think they're going to be able to have that type of performance, or that Sycamore last even better. I think they can come close to doing what they did against Morris. They just had an incredible game against Morris. I think they had over 400 rushing yards as a team. They have many backs, but I think Manning is definitely the guy to keep the eye on for a second week in a row.
Yep. I'm going to totally just jump into the area we haven't even talked about today, Kishwaukee River Conference. My click to pick is Simeon Harris from Sandwich, the running back. That's another one of those 3-3 versus 3-3 matchups this week. Sandwich is playing host to Woodstock. Not Woodstock North, but Woodstock. Woodstock North still undefeated, which is one of those real good feel-good stories around, but a little bit out of our normal talking area. But Sandwich, Simeon Harris last year, he was 1,000-yard rusher. Just kind of took the state by storm as a player from a program that Sandwich didn't even field a varsity team the previous year, and then got off to that great start last year. Got into the 4A postseason. Simeon Harris was kind of the straw that stirred the drink there, leading rusher. He's kind of not a secondary role, but kind of with the emergence of Nick Michalik as the primary, I wouldn't say primary ball carrier, but he's had some big games here lately as teams have concentrated on taking Simeon Harris away. I think this is a week where maybe that turns back the other way. Harris had a big touchdown reception in their win last Friday, and I think he's going to have an all-around really big game. And Sandwich will get to 4-3 and put themselves in a great position, even though with that tough Woodstock North game in week 8, to return to the playoffs.
Yeah, no, is anyone rooting against Sandwich? I don't think anyone's rooting against Sandwich, except for maybe
people
KRC team. Was that?
Yeah, I think people in Plano.
Okay, other than people,
they always root against Sandwich. I think as a law.
That's a fair point, because that's outside of that though. But yeah, no, and Harris has obviously been. I got to watch him in a playoff game. I forget whichever one they played at Lane Stadium in Chicago, because I did the Sycamore game early and then that game late. And boy, that kid's as good as advertised, and that was last year. So
yeah, he's electric, and his stats haven't been as beat you over the head as impressive this year. And I think my guess would be teams are scheming to take him away, and Sandwich is like, okay, well, here's a couple other guys. That's one good thing about assuming they still run the wing tee. I haven't seen him in person this year. I would sure think so. It's Sandwich football. That's one thing about that wing tee is, if you stop one guy, well, here comes a fullback trap. Here comes a jet sweep. There's always another guy, because you have 3 guys running by the quarterback when the ball's in his hands anyway every play. So it's just a matter of which one you hand it off to and how the blockers attack it. So yeah, my pick Simeon Harris.
Okay, so I think that wraps up our look at week 7 here. So I think we'll call that a podcast.
Sounds great. Thanks for playing hurt, Eddie.
Yeah, thank you for playing hurt. So, J.T. Pedelty, I'm Eddie Carifio. Thanks.